6 types of personalities appear as manifestations of Lord Hari. They are the ruling Manu, the chief demigods, the sons of Manu, Indra, the great sages, and the partial incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then the next topic, Ishanu Katha, narrations about the Lord and his devotees. These are the Leelas of various avatars, but not Krishna Leela, which is the Ashraya, so that's distinct. The Leelas of the original personality of Godhead are a little distinct from the activities of his various avatars as they appear in the material world. The spiritual world has some different qualities to it. So again, from the 2nd canto, chapter 10, verse 5, the science of God describes the incarnations of the personality of Godhead and his different activities, together with the activities of his great devotees. Then the 3rd topic, Nirodha, or annihilation. When cosmic devastation occurs, the Nitya-Bhada jivas merge into Mahavishnu along with their conditioned natures. So that's a very important topic. What happens when the universe is finished? Does the or is the universe eternal, or does it have a beginning and an end? These are questions that people are asking and debating about. There's so many theories, but nobody knows for sure. In the Bhagavatam, that topic is very specifically dealt with. Cosmic devastation, that things are not eternal in one sense, or the living conditions are not eternal in the material world. The matter itself, the living beings themselves, they're all eternal. But the interactions and then all the consequent shapes and forms and activities that come about as a result of the interaction of the living beings with matter, that's all false. It's false in the sense that it doesn't last, it's temporary. It's not false in the sense that it's not going on. But actually, anything that's temporary cannot be said to be real. So if it's not real, then it means it's unreal, it's Maya, or it's false. So this material cosmic manifestation, everything within it, is actually a false construct. And there's a particular purpose for that. So, as we mentioned, there's particular kinds of living beings that this universe is constructed for, and they are mentioned here as Nitya-Bhadas, eternally conditioned. They're forgetful of their real nature. And so they may even stay in this universe, or many universes, for practically an unlimited amount of time. You can't measure it. Even beyond the life of a Lord Brahma, when the cosmic manifestation is completely wound up and everything goes back into the body of Lord Mahavishnu and remains there for some time. But what is that time? It's not the time that we measure on a clock. It just means a period in which the Lord draws back the Nitya-Bhadas and the material energy back into himself, and then at another period he breathes them all out again. Just the other week I was reading about parallel universes, multi-universes, these are all theories that the scientists are kind of exploring. But we already have that in the Bhagavatam. The creation of billions of universes. I was with Srila Prabhupada in Hyderabad in 1976. And in the afternoons he was accustomed to take a nap after his lunch. And then when he woke up, we would come and we would give some sandalwood paste on his forehead, and we would offer him a garland, and we would also offer him a glass of fruit juice or a piece of fruit itself, and Prabhupada would have that. So this particular day I gave Prabhupada a pomegranate. So a little while later I went back into his room, to clear everything away, and Prabhupada was sitting there, and as I grabbed it was kind of like half open, you could see all the seeds inside it. So as I grabbed the pomegranate, then Prabhupada smiled and said, "Just see, He said all the universes are just like this. They're all packed. I said, are they packed up so tightly? Prabhupada said yes. So they're all coming from Lord Mahavishnu, and many, many universes all packed up like that. So that's knowledge that we get from the Bhagavatam. You haven't got any way of proving it, and you haven't got any way of disproving it either. And at least the material scientists are coming around to some of the concepts that have always been there in the Bhagavatam. Multi-universes, parallel universes, states of existence that, one living being may be living in one particular kind of state of existence, and in the same space another living being is living, but is not being perceived by the first living being. They occupy the same space, but are completely unaware of each other. So they're considering these kinds of topics now, but they're all there in the Bhagavatam. Yeah, there's so many different levels of existence in the universe, we cannot perceive them at all. But they're there. So the Bhagavatam then has a specific science to it. We should never think that the Bhagavatam is some kind of fairy tales or imaginations. It's no less a science than what is being presented as science nowadays by the gross materialists. In fact, it's more of a science because it deals with the real principle of existence, which is consciousness. So here's a couple of quotes here from the second canto, chapter 10, verse 6. The merging of the living entity along with his conditional living tendency with the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu is called the winding up of the cosmic manifestation. So that's all nicely described. Then another quote from the 12th canto. There are 4 types of cosmic annihilation: occasional, elemental, continuous, and ultimate, all of which are affected by the inherent potency of the Supreme Lord. Learned scholars have designated this topic dissolution. So there's partial destructions, occasional ones, there's elemental, and there's ultimate. So in other words, again, the same idea that nothing in the material world is eternal, except the living beings. But the constructs of the material world are constantly being recreated, if you like, reordered. Yes, Prabhu?
What was the 12th canto verse?
The 12th canto, 12:7-17. Then the next topic is mukti, or liberation. Sukadev's definition of real liberation: muktir idvanyata rupam swarupena vyavastiti. That liberation is the permanent situation of the form of the living entity after he gives up the changeable gross and subtle material bodies. I'll repeat that one. Liberation is the permanent situation of the form of the living entity after he gives up the changeable gross and subtle material bodies. So in other words, the living being has a form beyond matter. Yeah, we identify, with this gross and subtle forms that we have, the mind and the material body. But real liberation is when you attain a form which is beyond the changeable forms. In other words, you get your spiritual or real form. That's liberation. Not just that you separate yourself from matter, as the Mayavadis claim, or the impersonalists claim, oh, now I'm liberated because I know I'm not this body. That's not liberation. Liberation, according to the Bhagavatam, that quotes from the second chapter, 2nd canto, 10th chapter, verse 6. He says that liberation is a permanent situation of the form of the living being. That means he has an eternal spiritual form. Okay, and then number 5, Ashraya, the ultimate shelter. To explain the Ashraya, there's a verse from Sukadeva Goswami and one from Sutta Goswami. This is the 2nd canto, chapter 10, verse 7. The Supreme One, who is celebrated as the Supreme Being or the Supreme Soul, is the supreme source of the cosmic manifestation, as well as its reservoir and its winding up. Thus he is the supreme fountainhead, the absolute truth. In other words, everything is subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So all the functions of the universe, creation, maintenance, annihilation, the placement of the living beings within it or out of it, withdrawing them, into the form of Mahavishnu, all of that is going on due to a supreme conscious living being. Everything. And that supreme living being is the goal of life. He is the ultimate shelter, the ashraya. There is a shelter. Every living being is looking for shelter of some kind or another. And everybody has that tendency to try to make a home somewhere, or to join a particular group where he feels accepted and wanted, and he can interact and enjoy. So everybody has an inherent tendency for shelter, seeking shelter. Why? Because we're not supreme. Because we're not supreme. Therefore, we must have some shelter. The Supreme doesn't require any shelter. He is the shelter. And that's the difference between us and God. God doesn't have to belong to any club. He is the club. And we need to be situated somewhere where we feel comfortable and protected and looked after. It's a natural tendency for every living being. So, understanding that Supreme Personality of Godhead then is the ultimate goal of the Bhagavatam. So, there's a note here. It says in this verse that the abhasa, or appearance, is material creation. Nirodha is its dissolution. This is all a little bit technical here. Let me jump ahead a bit. The renowned fountainhead of existence, the Ashraya, is known as Brahman, the Supreme Truth, Paramatma, the Super Soul. And here the word iti expresses the idea of a complete category, thus implying that Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is included as well. This verse echoes another verse which begins Brahmati Paramatmati Bhagavaniti Sabhyate. That's from the 1st canto, chapter 2, verse 11, which describes that supreme absolute truth in 3 features. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And then again there's another quote from Sutta Goswami. The supreme absolute truth is present through all the states of awareness: waking consciousness, sleep, and deep sleep. And throughout all the phenomena manifested by the external energy, and within the functions of all living entities, and he also exists separate from all of these. So in other words, he's within everything, he's outside of everything. There's nothing that's not connected to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the definition of absolute truth. That every single thing, knowable or unknowable, is somehow or another connected by this one unifying principle. And that unifying principle, of course, is a person, the Supreme Person. So thus situated in his own transcendence, he is the ultimate and unique shelter. Then there's so those are the 5 topics, the second half of the 10 topics. And then there's a few more notes here, which I'm going to try. Just give me 1 second to... Alright, this is an important point. Now, the supremacy of the Srimad Bhagavatam amongst all Vedic literature. This is another topic. That out of all the Vedic literature, the Bhagavatam is considered to be the best. It's the highest. And why? Because there's a difference between the Mahapurana and a lesser Purana. This is a Mahapurana. A Mahapurana deals extensively with all these 10 topics, while a Lesser Purana deals with only 5, or mainly with 5. And what are those 5? The ones that you did in your last lesson. Sarga, creation. Pratisarga, dissolution. Vamsa, the genealogies of kings or sages. Manvantaras, the reigns of the Manus, and Vamshanu Charita, the histories of various sages, kings, and incarnations. So in the course of discussing these 5 topics, a Lesser Purana will discuss all 10 topics of a Mahapurana, but will only treat these first 5 in depth. This difference in how extensively the 10 topics are treated constitutes the principal distinction between a Mahapurana and a Lesser Purana. So, in other words, a Lesser Purana deals mainly with the topics of this material universe. You will see that ordinary religions, let's say we're not talking just about, things rooted in the Vedas, but there's other forms of religion extensive all over the world. But in all of those religions, they only deal with the material universe. They may deal with God, but they only deal with God in the material universe. They don't deal with God outside the universe in the spiritual world because there's no information. So these similarly, even in the Puranas, the first, the Lesser Puranas deal mainly with the living being's condition in this material world, what the material world is, its duration, the activities that go on within it, the appearance of God or his representatives within the universe, for specific purposes. These are avatars. So those are the main topics, and you don't find much about anything beyond that. But in the Bhagavatam, the whole 9 cantos is meant to bring us up to the point of where we can read in the 10th canto the transcendental activities of the Lord in the spiritual world. And there are 90 chapters in the 10th canto, whereas in the other cantos there's maybe 15 up to about 30. But the 10th canto, that's the summum bonum, because it talks about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all of his transcendental activities, which have nothing to do with the material world. So this is the specific quality of the Bhagavatam, that it takes us beyond the realm of ordinary perceptions. Just like the scientists, they have these telescopes, radio telescopes, or the Hubble, or there's so many other ones now that they've got there, and they're taking photographs in the universe. But what is that? You get a photograph, it's coloured in certain ways. So there's a spectrum of light that telescope can tune into and, let's say, capture an image of. But that spectrum of light is just the spectrum of light that we're able to interpret with our own eyes. In these mortal forms, tiny, insignificant, less 70, 80 or 100 years, in the face of the eternity of the universe, what is our sense perception? What are we actually seeing? We're only seeing what we're able to see with the bodies that we're limited by, or that we're currently occupying. What's really going on in the universe, we have no idea, because of our spectrum of light is limited. We don't see ultraviolet, we don't see, even if you can measure so many different spectrums of light, there's nothing to say that there isn't more spectrums of light beyond what we can measure. So ordinarily, we see a certain bandwidth, but we know that there's certain creatures on this planet that see things that we don't see. The same with, sound. A few years back, a couple of decades ago, they suddenly discovered how elephants communicate by making certain kinds of sounds which is, subsonic to our hearing. We have a particular range of hearing, but elephants talk to each other in on a sound level which is not perceivable to the human ear. We all, know about dog whistles, right? You blow a dog whistle, you don't hear anything, but all the dogs in the area hear it because they have a different range of perception. So all of our senses have a limited range of perception, and then what we do is we take a machine to, kind of expand that range of perception. But whatever information those machines are gathering, they can only gather what they're programmed to gather. And what they're programmed to gather is within the range of perception of a human being. Obviously, if a human being's not aware of something beyond his own perception, he can't make a machine to detect something that's beyond his range of perception. All he can detect or magnify is the range of perception that he already possesses, which is nothing, virtually. When we look at the night sky, and there's billions of planets out there, who knows what's going on in any part of the universe at any given time? Nobody does. At least not on our plane of existence. So we tend to, assimilate things, we reference things according to our own experiences. And anything that's beyond our experience, and what can you say about them? Nothing. So, generally speaking, what we find in the lesser Puranas, or in, mundane religions, let's say, that are not pure and transcendental, is descriptions of the universe within the perceptions of man. In fact, most other Shastras don't even have any information about what's going on other planets. You find some references to angels and heavenly creatures or heavenly beings and ghosts, things like that. But actually, information about what's going on, the living conditions on other planets, nobody has that. That's there in the Veda. There are descriptions of Janaloka, Tapaloka, Mahaloka, Satyaloka. These are the higher positions of the universe. Or if you go down, Patalaloka and all the lower lokas there. There's some description of the living there that's given in the Bhagavatam. But still, all of that, not the Bhagavatam, but the Puranas, still all of that information is in relation to this material world. It's in relation to the conditioned state of a Nijabhada. You still have to know it in order to be able to thread your way out of it, but you need to know beyond that also. So the Mahapuranas, they give information beyond the universe. They give detailed information about Vaikuntha Loka, Krishna Loka, etc., etc. As Prabhupada used to say, that we know God's name, we know his address, we know his telephone number, we know where he lives. That information is not there anywhere else, and that's the distinct feature of the Bhagavatam, that it gives this information, transcendental information. So that's one point, the difference between a Mahapurana and an ordinary Purana. And then secondly, it says the Bhagavatam is the natural commentary on the Brahma Sutras, written by the same author. The Brahma Sutras are supposed to be very highly philosophical codes. Sutra means like a code. So encapsulated is very deep meanings within a few words. So it's very difficult for ordinary people to figure out what the Vedanta Sutra is all about. So the Bhagavatam is the expanded version of the Brahma Sutra. It's a more elaborate, detailed description of what's being described in the Brahma Sutra. And then third, the Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana. It describes the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. So again, the same principle there. It's spotless because it's not tinged by any material perceptions. It has nothing, it's not a product of this material world and our perceptions of this material world. It comes down from somewhere beyond the material world. Therefore it's spotless. It's indestructible, the knowledge that's given there. So then there's another topic, systematic study of the Bhagavatam. So that one there was about the supremacy of the Bhagavatam amongst Vedic literature. Now there's a note here about studying the Bhagavatam, which is what you're all doing. Yes, Manager.
To ask a question.
Yes.
You said that Srimad Bhagavatam, the spotless Purana, comes from beyond this world.
It comes from?
From beyond this world.
Yes.
So with our present senses and perceptions as they are, how are we able to appreciate this?
Because your present senses are spiritual, but they're just covered over by matter.
Because
you have spiritual senses, you have a spiritual mind, you have a spiritual intake, you have a spiritual being. You are a spiritual being, and we are. But because of our identification with matter, our perception of ourselves as eternal living beings and as being part of that eternal world has been reduced. Because we identify with matter instead. Now the whole process is to give up identification with matter, and as we do so, the spiritual nature of the self becomes more and more apparent. So we begin to regain our capacity for spiritual perception. We develop spiritual senses, we develop a spiritual mind, we develop a spiritual intellect. So our perception of the spiritual world increases if we follow the right process of becoming disassociated from matter. That's called education. It means to know more about yourself, to know more about the true self, to know more about the truth of what we are, why we're here, where we're going, etc., etc. So you can't immediately jump from a conditioned state to a pure state. So there's a process that's being offered which, as we say, purifies, or it removes the contaminated or illusioned understanding of the self gradually. Prabhupada mentions in the second canto that chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, because that's Krishna's name, Krishna is non-different from his name. So the entire spiritual everything, the spiritual worlds, everything that's going on in it, that's Krishna. So Krishna is his name. So when you chant Krishna's name, we don't immediately perceive the true nature of the name. But by doing so, we gradually purify our consciousness. We start to disassociate from identification with matter, and we start to identify more with Krishna. And as we do so, Krishna gives us enlightenment from within. So it comes down. It's not something that we can, get hold of ourselves. It has to be given to us. On our part, we have to show a willingness to accept it. So we apply ourselves to the process of devotional service, we apply ourselves to the process of chanting. As we do so, Krishna from within enlightens us and makes us aware of his true nature. So in that way, then you can say it comes down or it comes out. There's no real up and down. Yeah, the spiritual world we're already in it, but we're just in a bubble of forgetfulness. There's a letter that Prabhupada wrote to Hamsadutta, I think, in 69 or 70, where he had had this realization that everything is spiritual, and Prabhupada said, yes, when you become Krishna conscious, you realize everything is spiritual. It's Krishna. It's just Krishna and Krishna's energies, and he uses those energies in different ways. We're situated within those energies, and we are also energy of the Supreme Lord. So in that way then, just like in Hyderabad on the morning walk in December 76, there's one young boy, Moti Das's son. He had read about the sun god, So he asked Srila Prabhupada, is the sun god an incarnation of Krishna? And Prabhupada said, you are an incarnation of Krishna. And he wasn't joking, he meant it. You are an incarnation of Krishna. Because we're all, he said, because we're all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. So that is our true nature. So how do we perceive something which is transcendental when we're in the material world? We become honest. That's all. We stop pretending to be something that we're not. And then that which is, that means Krishna. Krishna, everything is Krishna. Becomes apparent to us again. Yeah, we've turned a blind eye, as they say. We don't see Krishna. Krishna's in our hearts, he's in every atom, he's all over, around us. Everything is Krishna's energy that we can perceive or not perceive. But we've turned a blind eye to that and we've denied Krishna's existence. So in that condition, yeah, you can't perceive God. But to be able to perceive God, you have to be honest. Stop pretending. Now, I'm this body, I'm something in this material world. Yeah. Once we stop pretending, then Krishna becomes apparent to us again. Yeah. That's spotless Purana. It gives us true information, absolute information about existence, about the spiritual world, about the Supreme Lord. And all we have to do is give an oral reception. That's all. That's stated right at the beginning of the Bhagavatam. You don't have to do anything else. Yeah, there's no special activities or anything. You just give oral reception to the information that's in the Bhagavatam, and then automatically the modes of ignorance and passion recede. You come to the platform of goodness, and then you come to the platform of transcendence. So, does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you very much. Because the other thing was if it's all about consciousness, then how are the senses and the mind linked? How do they relate to this consciousness, especially our senses and our mind?
Everything is part of consciousness. Senses, mind, intellect, these are all different features of consciousness. Consciousness means awareness. That is the symptom of the soul. So, how do we become aware? We have different faculties. Yeah. In one sense they're the same, everything is spiritual, but it's still, in the spiritual world, there are faculties. Arms and legs and eyes and ears and tongues and, these senses are there in the spiritual world. And they're vehicles, if you like, or expressions of consciousness in different varieties. That's what your senses are all about. There's sound, there's taste, there's touch, there's sound, taste, touch. Sound, taste, touch, smell, and sight, yes. So all of those are different varieties of expressions of consciousness. See, this is what confuses the Mayavadis. So everything is one. So then where is the senses, where is the mind, where is there a body, where is there a form? They can't conceive of that. Because their experiences with those things are only in the material realm. And if you get out of the material realm, then their idea is that then all those things that are in the material realm cannot be there in the spiritual realm. But it's not true. They're here in the material realm because they're there in the spiritual realm. So the original status of the soul is that he has sense perception. He has a mind, he has intellect. These function in particular ways to create variety. Yeah. There's one consciousness, the supreme consciousness, that's Krishna. And then there's all the tiny little consciousnesses that are as parts and parcels. How do they interact? because the consciousnesses of Krishna and the living beings are expressed in variety. That's what the meaning of sense perception is variety. Is that all right?
It's amazing.
Yes, some describe the soul as amazing, some hear of him as amazing, and others just can't understand him at all.
You've explained it.
Krishna's statement.
You explained it very beautifully, because what you said is that the senses and mind and intellect are varieties of expressions of consciousness.
Yes.
And that's a really, it's a high progression of what we learn early on in our life in Krishna consciousness, that the body and the mind, the senses, they are all, certainly myself, something's shifted now, because I'm seeing them as parts of the body. I explain to my patients that these are your senses, this is your body, this is your mind, but where are you? What's going on here? Let's see, this isn't really affecting you.
Yes.
But that seems very disjointed. But what you've expressed now is a really nice, like the faculties, there are different faculties of a wholeness, which is consciousness. So that appreciation is a much higher appreciation than what I had before. So this clarifies.
Good. Yeah, there's two ways of looking at things. One's looking from, again, I had to use the directional, metaphor, but looking from up down,
Yes.
and then there's looking from down up.
Yes.
We tend to look from down up, so we measure everything from, the low position of thinking we are this body. But if you're looking from the other way, from Krishna's perspective,
Yes.
looking down, if you like, it's a completely different perspective.
Completely different. Yes.
And that's what the Bhagavatam's doing, is teaching us how to see things from a different perspective. Material scientists, they just rely on their material senses and minds and intellects, and they view the universe through that prism of their own, or prism, if you like, their own bodies and minds. So they're very limited in what they can perceive. But the Bhagavatam, reverses the direction, if you like. We see this body, we see these senses, and we see these minds, from the perspective of being an eternal, conscious living being. And then you have, you've gathered up some facility, if you like, to act within this world. But that's not where you make a judgment of life from. The facilities are a product, not the source. And the material scientists, they're seeing everything around them and thinking that is the source. And therefore they can't understand what life actually is. The Bhagavatam teaches us to see that life is the source and everything else is an effect. It's just, it's a different perspective.
Yeah, it's amazing, because, when I work with my patients, I think I'm looking from that position of a little bit more than them understanding that we are not this body. But what you've done now is not just looking at a little bit more than them understanding I'm not this body. It's what you said is it's actually, really inside out. It's just, it's staggering. It's,
Yes. Well, Ayurveda takes that view, because of course that's Veda, Ayurveda. It takes the view of the body as being a product of consciousness, not the other way around. So the way of dealing with the body and treating, the malfunctions of the body, it's just a completely different approach than you get from the allopathic point of view. Yeah. Anyway, that's a big topic, but it's perspective, that's the whole point. So we're trying to change the perspective. In other words, your worldview. People talk about the worldview. So modern science worldview was mechanistic. that life is a product of interactions of chemicals and mechanisms. And the Bhagavatam worldview is just the opposite. That life is the source and the mechanisms and the effects. Any other questions or comments? Yes,
It's fascinating to hear you explaining it so lucidly. And it just made me think that the materialistic demeanor shakes his fist and says, no, we've decided this is the way it is. And that it's all according to our perception, without a clue of understanding this message that Krishna is very kindly revealing about our actual nature. And as long as we're not willing to actually accept that there is a higher authority, we can never begin to appreciate what is the nature of Krishna's creation. But Krishna is so kindly making this information available so we can begin to get a proper understanding of where we fit into the whole scheme of things.
Yeah, what to speak about understanding Krishna.
Yeah.
There's no chance even for understanding matter.
Yeah.
This Sauri Prabhu, is our long-standing quantum physics genius. He's been working on pushing a new perception of matter based on the Bhagavatam. And he's trying to push that into mainstream science, that you have not yet understood the real nature of matter. And the Bhagavatam possesses information which will help you understand matter in a better way. Now, he's not even dealing with the soul and with, the supreme soul or anything on that topic. He just wants to convince modern scientists that there's better information just about matter in the Bhagavatam. So then at least they have some respect that the Bhagavatam is a scientific work. Then, once you have a little bit of respect, then you can start reading and thinking about, concepts that are way beyond your present perception. But first of all, you have to have that little bit of receptivity. So he's trying to build up some receptivity in scientists to accepting the Bhagavatam or the Vedas as being genuinely scientific works, which have a lot to tell us, even just about the material world. I want to speak about anything beyond it. The struggle is that because the Bhagavatam, has transcendental knowledge, which is not perceivable by ordinary materialists, they tend to then, when they read those descriptions, think that it's fairy tales. I've told this story a few times. I'll repeat it again. One of our devotees at Bhuttahari some years back was working with Danaviya Maharaj on, this topic of the Vedic cosmos and whatever, and they'd done a lot of research mainly in South India, and there was a meeting in Hyderabad of Vedic astronomers. It was advertised, Vedic astronomers. So we thought that would be worth somebody going there and making some contacts and finding out, what the latest thinking is, and especially, they're advertising not just astronomy, but Vedic astronomy. So he went there. Most of the conference was about the Surya Siddhanta, which is kind of accepted, although nobody knows what there's no date of origin for the Surya Siddhanta. It's just been always accepted that it's some thousands of years old. And Surya Siddhanta, it means it was some information given by the sun god, Siddhanta, some conclusions or statements about the universe given by the sun god to one of his followers or representatives, and that's how it came into human society. So what they were excited about was that the Surya Siddhanta, which they like to date, is at least 1,000 years old. They have to put a date on something. Oh, Surya Siddhanta, right? It describes positions of planets, planetary movements, sizes of planets. It's kind of technical, mathematical. And it's much akin to modern astronomy, where they're always trying to measure everything and distance it and, size it and weigh it and color it and, whatever. So in the Surya Siddhanta, it seems to have some agreement in the way it describes the universe with the way that modern astronomers describe it. And there's, some correspondence between some of the distances, orbits of different planets and the distances of the planets from each other. There's some correspondence in the Surya Siddhanta with modern astronomy. So they're all fired up, we had it first. Yeah, India, had it 1,000 years before the West. So they're all excited. That was their idea about Vedic astronomy. But then when it came to the Puranas, right, the Veda and the Puranas, and their descriptions, because lots of the Puranas have descriptions of, like the 5th canto Bhagavatam, of the planets and, state of the universe. So that, then, nobody wanted to know about it. And the general mood was that the Puranas are not real knowledge. They're not real science. Surya Siddhanta is science, but Puranas are not. And somebody even, Abdul Hari said, one of these so-called, Vedic astronomers even went so far as to say that the names of the demigods, which are given in the Puranas, are the names of different kinds of germs within the universe. So, there's a real problem there with accepting the Bhagavatam as a science, works of real science. Although when you really study it, as Prabhupada has presented it to us, you understand this is far greater science, it's far more scientific than anything that's been presented by, modern scientists, materialistic scientists. So, anyway, that's the whole point about the Bhagavatam. That's why Prabhupada wanted us to present the Bhagavatam in the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium as a challenge to scientists, to open their minds and make further inquiry. And come to this point of at least accepting that in the pages of the Bhagavatam there is real science. We're talking about the same topics, construction of the universe, nature of the living beings, nature of time, how did everything come about, what happens at the end. We're talking about the same topics, but this is a different perspective, that's all. And it's based, and the key point about it is that it's based on consciousness. Whereas material scientists are not interested, they are interested, but they have no explanation of consciousness. They don't know what it is, even though they themselves are conscious living beings. Some kind of consciousness anyway. Semi-conscious, half asleep or whatever they are. But the Bhagavatam just has this perspective based on an understanding of what consciousness actually is. And it can explain so many things which are unexplainable currently by the mechanistic scientists, because they don't know what consciousness is. And therefore they can't understand what the material world is. They have, they're struggling. They're just speculating this, that, and the other. But if you ever get into a discussion with, material scientists, this is the one point you can pin them down on. What is consciousness? What is the nature of consciousness? What is life? They can't explain it. They have no idea. There's not one single experiment that's ever been performed to prove that life comes from matter. It doesn't exist. So despite all the big talk and the fancy words, and ultimately pin him down on that one point. You tell me, what is life? What is consciousness, which is the symptom of life? How does it come about? That they can't say. That's where the two points of view merge, if you like, or they come to it. It's just an understanding of consciousness. Because Bhagavatam knows what consciousness is, explains what consciousness is, then, all these other topics become easily understandable. Not easily, but they become understandable. For material scientists, because they cannot understand what consciousness is, they will never understand the universe. Never, ever, ever. It's all a bluff. Everything that they write, you can see right through it. As soon as you concentrate on this one point, what is consciousness? Even, Richard Dawkins, he was on the TV last year or the year before with the Archbishop of Canterbury, or whatever he is, one of those guys. And he even had to admit, he said that on a scale of 1 to 7, atheism, being a full atheist is a 7. He said, I'm a 6.9. He said, I can't say that I'm a complete atheist because you can never prove that God does not exist. He accepts that. You can't prove that there is no God. And if you can't prove there's no God, then that means that there's every possibility there is God. So that's his choice, not to accept that. But he can't prove it. So he's dishonest. Because he's basing his whole, presentation and everything that he talks about based on something that he admits he cannot prove. That's cheating. And Bhagavatam requires us to be honest. That's the point. You can't be dishonest